Welcome to XXIM YouTube channel. In this video, Ankit sits down with Dr. Shai, PhD in Quantum Cryptography, to discuss if quantum computers pose a threat to Bitcoin.
Say you fell asleep for 20 years and then you woke up and you realize that all of your bitcoins are in pre-quantum UTXOs.
This is one of a kind detailed discussion, and you will not find anything like this anywhere on the internet.
If you take this narrative, then Bitcoin doesn't even need post-quantum signatures.
Last year's successful launch of Google's Willow quantum computer sparked a healthy debate within the Bitcoin and broader crypto community about the implications of quantum computing.
Since it's like a decent chunk of the entire circulation, then it threatens to undermine the entire economy.
In this video, Shai breaks down how quantum computers work, various challenges and opportunities quantum computers present.
Quantum mining, how quantum miners affect the network, and here the game is completely different. To break ECDSA at 128 bits ECDSA like you have in Bitcoin, you need about 2,500 logical qubits.
And as a bonus, you will get to hear from Shai about his new venture.
I've mostly spent the last week sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for when I get to share more of the stuff that I've been doing.
Welcome to XXIM Podcast, your home of decentralization. Today, I'm here with Dr. Shai. Welcome, Shai. Good to see you here.
Welcome, Ankit. Thanks for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Yeah, it's good to see you after 4 months. I think we did our last session in March. So, Shai, I wanted to have you here to discuss a very interesting topic, perhaps, different from Kaspa this time. I wanted to discuss quantum computing and if quantum computers will kill Bitcoin one day. But before that, though, I wanted to ask you how you've been since we caught up last time.
Well, it's been very interesting. I took upon me a lot of interesting projects, and I'm extremely busy. I think in some way, moving away created new opportunities for me to contribute to crypto and also to the Kaspa ecosystem. I'm working on a lot of interesting stuff. I keep saying this and I'm being really mysterious. What are these things I'm working about? But this is the problem, that you work with formative projects and formative ideas, and then you have to keep a lid on it. But I've been terribly busy. I'm going to tell you at some point today at least about one very cool project I haven't talked about before.
Awesome.
And because it's in the post-quantum world. And I talked, and it's just been like a time of doing a lot. I pushed forward a lot of things. Some of them, like the posts I posted yesterday, are already out there. Some stuff is still under wraps, but very interesting things are coming, both to Kaspa and to crypto in general. And it's really, really exciting for me. I've mostly spent the last week sitting on the edge of my seat waiting for when I get to share more of the stuff that I've been doing in the last weeks and months.
I'm looking forward to what you have to share with us. It's definitely alpha for this session. But I wanted to mention, though, I wanted to have this session specifically with you because there's a lot of people out there in crypto that talk about post-quantum cryptography, right? But there's no one better, according to me at least, who knows about this topic than yourself with a PhD in quantum cryptography. Perhaps not many people are aware of it.
I will even one-up it a little bit more. There are two main themes in my thesis. In one of them, like 60% of my PhD dissertation is about post-quantum migration in Bitcoin. And
really?
For
that's
migrating after, like, say you fell asleep for 20 years and then you woke up and you realize that all of your bitcoins are in pre-quantum UTXOs, but in this future, everybody has a scalable quantum computer in their garage. So how can we help you? So this is the question that I dedicated more than half of my PhD when we came up with the first complete solution for that.
I think the last question I'm going to ask you is about Satoshi's wallet. But let me perhaps start by asking the very simple question. Right. for people that are not aware of quantum computers. What are quantum computers? Let's just define them and how they're different from a traditional computers that we all use every day.
Well, giving this the precise explanation is not realistic, and so we have to go to like metaphors and analogies. So if I want to be very abstract about it, it's like the way your computer work. It relies mostly on classical assumptions, what we call. It's not entirely true because you need quantum effects to have semiconductors. But on the abstract computational level, everything that your computer do, you can do with like pulleys and levers and like with gravity. There is nothing there which is unusual. And quantum computers just in a sense allow you to do just one single operation, additional operation, that can take two states, which you being in either or in one state, and change it to what we call a superposition of being halfway between two states. And that's about it. And then you just, you take this new capability and you throw it inside the usual computational models. And to accommodate this rotation, this ability to be in between, you need like this slight generalization of what we call a bit, that we call a qubit, which is like, it could be, in a sense, it could be between 0 and 1, but in several ways that can either add to each other or cancel each other. Like, it's like probability, but you can also have like a negative or complex probability, but it's very important. And with these capabilities, you can do stuff that we don't know how to do classically. And one of the things that someone figured out how to do, and this someone is Professor Peter Shor, is how to, well, most people know Shor's algorithm as an algorithm that can decompose numbers to primes. But the more accurate thing to say is that it knows how to solve something called the period finding problem or the order finding problem. And it's important to say it in this level of abstractness, because then you can apply this capability not only to prime factorizations, but to a family of problems that we call discrete logarithm problems. And what's so important about discrete logarithm problems is that the assumption that these problems are hard to solve sits at the core of almost all public key cryptography, like public key encryption, public key signatures. And public key signatures are the core of the cryptographic identity in most cryptocurrencies. Just the way that you are cryptographically identified is by your ability to create a signature. So if the signature scheme is broken, there is no way for us to authenticate the identity of the person who wants to spend the money, because anyone can fake their signatures. And the entire ownership model, you could say, it completely breaks down.
Yeah. So just quickly summarizing, right, in a very simple way, classical versus quantum computer difference, right? So classical computers, sort of the way they process information is different from the quantum computers, right? Classical will have, the way I guess most people will understand it, will have representation of zeros and ones, right, in bits, right? Versus a quantum computer, we could say qubits. They can exist in many states, right? I think it's like an analogy I like is tossing a coin, right?
It's one state, but the state is in a superposition of many possible outcomes. I don't think you really have to understand what it is. Maybe I'll give a very simple analogy. Say you have a machine that can only do addition, right? You can give it two numbers and it can do addition and subtraction to make everything reversible. And now you want to do a multiplication. And you want to do multiplication, but not just by integers. You want to be able to multiply by a half or this kind of stuff. And then a machine that can only do addition can't do all of the multiplications. So when you also add a multiplication, you increase the computational power of your machine. Can you increase it any further? Apparently not, because with addition and multiplication, you can compute just about anything, anything reasonable. And there is a very deep calculus reason for this. If anyone knows what, ever heard of something called a Taylor series, then it's essentially just taking stuff that is complex and represented it as a sequence of polynomials, where a polynomial is very simple. All you need to do to describe a polynomial is addition and multiplication. And now, okay, what can you add to make this multiplicative additive machine even more powerful? Church-Turing hypothesis says that you can't make anything that can compute stuff that you can't compute with addition and multiplication. But maybe you can have speedups. Maybe you can have a machine that can do stuff much faster. And we believe that if you add this one new operator, which we can define as a 45-degree spin in the state space and the block state, but it doesn't matter. The point is that there is new operation that you allow your computer to do. And suddenly we believe that it can't increase the set of problems that such a computer can solve, but we do believe that it increases the set of problems that such a machine can solve quickly. Like a classical machine can completely simulate a quantum machine. A quantum machine can't add any more computational capabilities, but the simulation is exponentially complex. So if you're not talking about classical machines, but about polynomial classical machines, then suddenly we think that there are like polynomial quantum machines or efficient quantum algorithms that can't be done efficiently on classical.
So what is a polynomial?
And we believe that discrete logarithm is one of them.
What is a polynomial quantum machine?
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm just to use
No,
the jargon.
good.
When you talk with a computational complexity theorist or just a theoretical computer science, and they say polynomial, and the word you need to translate it in your head is efficient. That's all it means.
I see.
The way we model efficient is something that you can write a polynomial that describes how slow it is in the worst case.
I see. All right. So I think we can establish that quantum computer uses quantum mechanics properties, right?
Well, I don't think it's a good way to look at it, because in principle, being a universal quantum computation is not defined by the way you do the computation, but with the classes of problems you can solve. It's like when we talk about a complexity class, you don't talk about specific machines, you just talk about a set of problems. And if someone comes up with a machine that can solve all these problems, and we know that there are machines that have no entanglement and no superposition, but they are equivalent to quantum computation, because they solve the same class of problem. Yeah. For example, there is this entire world that is called adiabatic computation. You know what adiabatic means? It means that in physics or chemistry, an adiabatic process is a process that conserves heat. Like it doesn't emit any heat. So the point is that since you do it very, very, very slowly, and this is the catch, you might have to do it exponentially slow. If you do it very, very slowly, then you can transform the state that is easy for you to create into the state you want to create it and close the solution to the problem. No superpositions here. Maybe there are, but you don't use entanglement. And this is called the adiabatic model, and it is known to be completely equivalent to the standard qubit definition of quantum computation. So I really think that if you want to think about quantum computers, don't try to think about how they work, just about what they are supposed to accomplish.
What they're supposed to accomplish. I think that's a good way to look at it, because all the definitions I've come across are actually sort of talking from the quantum mechanics, quantum physics perspective. They're not looking from an application specific. Maybe in the academic field it is, but in the mainstream it's the opposite, right? So that's good to get clarity on that. So Shai, let me ask you then this question, right? So do you see a world, right, where quantum computers will break Bitcoin's cryptography, right, which is elliptic curve cryptography that obviously Bitcoin signatures work on today? So do you see a world that in, I don't know, X number of years that could happen?
I don't know, but I can tell you that there was a survey that asked about 40 top tier experts about the the efforts to actually build a quantum computer. But it was very multidisciplinary, because if you only ask people that actually work about building one of these, then you're gonna get a biased answer.
That's true.
But it seems that about half of them, or more than half of them, believe. Now you have to ask it very precisely, because you're talking to computer scientists. So
that's true.
Like the question was framed to be precise, to because it's a nitpicky audience, nitpicky population, but more than 50% of those surveyed believe that there is more than 50% chance that we will have quantum computers in a cryptographically relevant scale by 2035.
2035. So in 10 years, we will have computers that more than 50% of
half
people...
of the experts believe that there is a probability of half. That don't say it's gonna happen. It's just
right.
It's better to be prepared.
Better to be prepared, and that's where I think there is a lot of work happening within the Bitcoin community in the post-quantum cryptography space. Bitcoin uses SHA-256, right, a hash function for creating Merkle trees, essentially, right? And then
I don't know if they use SHA for the Merkle trees, but it doesn't matter. They use hash functions.
Hash functions, right? And then obviously Bitcoin also uses elliptic curve cryptography, right, to create this private public key, right? That's the second one that perhaps they use, right? And when we talk about, one day where these quantum computers will or will not be able to break these cryptographies, we are talking specifically about the elliptic curve cryptography, right? We're not talking about SHA-256.
Yeah, it's a very subtle point. Hash functions aren't really threatened by quantum computers if what you want to do is to invert them or to find collisions.
Right.
If you treat them as black boxes, like you say, let's say that a hash function is like what it's supposed to be. It's called a random oracle. And then if you assume that it is a random oracle, then there is a proof, like a straightforward proof, that you can't do better than what's called Grover algorithm, which gives you what's called a quadratic speedup. So if it used to take you 2 to the 1,000 years, now it's going to take you 2 to the 500 years. It's not much of an improvement.
2 to the 500 years to get to the Grover's algorithm, which can break SHA-256.
Yeah, I mean, if you have a computation that classically would require, if you want to sell, like say a low nonce, and the probability that you get a nonce, like say the difficulty is like 60, so every nonce that you sample solves the block with probability 2 to the 200, about 2 to the 200. So you're gonna have to try about 2 to the 200 times before you find a solution. Then with Grover's algorithm, you would only have to try 2 to the 100 times.
2 to the 100
2 to the 100 times is still huge. If you are really worried about it, you can do this very small upgrade that instead of using a 256-bit hash, you use a 512-bit hash, and that's it. Grover's algorithm is the advantage is all gone. There are other things that worry us a bit about quantum miners, but this is like a separate topic that people talk about less. But what is really concerning people is the public key cryptography. And especially the signatures that are used as cryptographic identities. People came up with very, very interesting approaches, like a new set of hardness assumption to replace discrete log, that there are reasons, both empirical and theoretical, to believe that these new assumptions are hard even for quantum computers. However, the assumptions have enough structure and enough, they're complicated enough that we could extract security from. Like the art is to take the fact that something natural is hard and do something to make something that you want to be hard is hard. Like, you know that discrete log is hard, then you design your encryption scheme in a way so that you can mathematically prove that if someone managed to break your your crypto system, they also managed to compute a discrete log.
I see.
The hardness of the discrete log implies the security of your encryption scheme.
That's a good way to think about it. I like it, actually. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so we replace it with the post-quantum hardness assumptions. Maybe you've heard the terms learning with errors or lattice-based cryptography. The very, very high view idea is that because quantum computers can do something that is called a Fourier transform very fast, which is something mathematical that most people don't understand. But to translate it to stuff that people do understand, Fourier being able to do a fast Fourier transform means that you can very easily find periodicity and symmetry. And this periodicity is what helps you break a lot of stuff because you exploit the high symmetry of the problem. So the idea of this new hardness assumption is to introduce noise. Noise that for someone who knows the secret key, they know that the noise is actually very, very concentrated. But for everyone who doesn't know the secret key, the noise seems completely random. And because the noise kind of destroys all of the inner structure and gets amplified when you try to find symmetries, then if you try to just do a Fourier thing like you did for D-log, you just get that you get almost all of the output that you get is the amplified noise, and all of the actual information that just gets phased away. So this is like that's why it's called learning with errors, because the entire point is that you introduce an error and then you see that the other side can't learn anything because of the errors you introduced. But if you gave them a key, then they can diminish the errors and learn what you wanted. Like
learning.
This is yes.
Learning with errors. So Shai, can I ask, so in reality, right, how soon you think quantum computers threatens, Bitcoin security? Because that's what most people want to know, right? Is it going to be tomorrow? Or is it going to be 10 years, 15 years, even longer time horizon? The quantum computers today, like even Villa, which is perhaps the most powerful quantum computer, uses 100 qubits, right? And experts predict they need up to 1,000 to 10,000 qubits. So it's a long way away, right? The way I think if we just look at from a qubit perspective.
Let me answer you from a qubit perspective. From a qubit perspective, there are two types of qubits. There are what we call physical qubits and what we call logical qubits. Physical qubits are like how many pieces of actual hardware you have that behave like a qubit. A physical qubit is a literal physical unit of information. And the problem with physical qubits is that they tend to be noisy and they have errors. So what we do is we use a technique called the quantum error correction codes. And this technique allows us to take physical qubits, which are imperfect, and use error correction techniques to create a much smaller amount of logical qubits, which are the pure qubits that you think about. Now, the thing is that as an algorithm developer, as someone who assumes you're handed a quantum machine, you don't care about the physical qubits. You only care about the logical qubits. Like if they tell you that your RAM, now in classical computers, we don't use error correction because we learned how to create silicon microchips that are so reliable that you can just count on errors not happening. But it wasn't always the case. In the days that we used tubes, and then there were errors and there was error correction, and von Neumann famously proved that you can fix errors and have fault-tolerant computation. And the thing is that you don't care. If the RAM on your PC gives you a gigabyte of RAM, but underneath it has like 10 gigabytes of imperfect RAM and some error correcting scheme, well, it doesn't. But even if it had, you wouldn't care. As far as you care, you have a gigabyte of RAM. Don't care what happens underneath. So in terms of logical qubits, we know that to break ECDSA at 128 bits ECDSA like you have in Bitcoin, you need about 2,500 logical qubits. So how much physical qubits is it? So to really answer this, you need to think about three things. One is how larger and less noisy the actual physical chips become, which is a very slow pace and a very uphill battle. And the second is how good the algorithms are, because you can optimize them and reduce the hardware requirements. And these are the two things that most people would come up with if you ask them what are the limitations for quantum computation. But there is a third one, which I already mentioned, which is how good we are in error correction. And let me tell you a story about that. In about 2018 or 2019, I think, someone, I really should have pulled up their name in advance, but someone published a very famous paper, and its name is something like how to factor RSA integers, which is about the same as breaking ECDSA, in an afternoon with 20 million qubits, which was really cool. He just took all of the current hardware and algorithms and error correction and just specified each and each stage and just used, just meticulously computed everything. And then around 2022, a bunch of researchers came up with a completely new method to do quantum error correction, which reduced overheads significantly. And a few months later, the same guy posted a new paper called How to Factor RSA Integers in an Afternoon with 2 million qubits, or 1 million. So just this one push in error correction, it was a very significant push, but one push in error correction and you reduced the number of physical qubits you need by an order of magnitude.
Right.
So this advanced, since it's like, it goes in so many fronts, then you can't know where the next breakthrough is going to come from and how significant it's going to be. So it's better to be prepared. I think it's a very good goal to set, a very good, I don't know, a benchmark to set. It's to be prepared by 2035. I think this is very reasonable.
Yeah, just a quick question on the error rate itself. Why do these errors actually happen? Is it because of physical properties? And they are operating at absolute zero temperatures, right? These machines. So is it because of physical conditions?
So you can't get to the actual absolute zero, right? And you can get very close to it.
Very close to it.
I don't know the actual numbers, but contemporary quantum machines work at below 1 Kelvin. It's very, very cold. Like someone asked me, if they need it to be cold, why don't they just put it in a room with a strong air conditioner or something? I said, because you'd still be about 250 degrees too hot. It's very, very cold.
So okay. So the the question I was asking you is because of the physical conditions, this error correction needs to be taken care of?
Errors happen. Anywhere errors happen, but the error is not just the error rates, but it's also the error propagation. And the way the errors propagate through a quantum system, because you have this entanglement and superposition and stuff, then errors can propagate very, very quickly throughout your entire state. And it makes error correction harder. You have various types of errors, because if before an error, like what's an error classically is just flipping a bit.
Yes.
But if you think about qubit, there is an entire whole way of making a noise, and because qubits are entangled, they could be correlated. So if one qubit is deformed by the noise, it actually affects the statistics of the other qubit. So you have all sorts of these complications.
I see.
Because the definition of entanglement of two qubits is that I can, like, what I do on my side, on one hand, affects on what you do on the outcome of what you do on your side. On the other hand, in a way that you can't know. Only a third party examining you both can know that. It makes everything very, very complicated.
Yeah, the observer effect, right?
Mostly because the physical effects that you need, like in computers, they are very, very robust. You only need to have. Why do you even need microchips? What is the basic task of a silicon microchip? Is to create two states, 0 and 1. And we do this by taking what we call a semiconductor, which is like this magical material that if you pass just a little bit of electricity through it, then it is an insulator. But the second you pass some threshold, it becomes a conductor. So these are your two states, and you need to put in a lot of energy to go from one state to the other. There is what we call a good separation between them, especially in silicon. Silicon, it has what we call a spectral gap. It's just, if you put enough energy, you can move it from the first state to the second state. And it's not like an insulator that no matter how you would set it on fire before you can make it conduct any energy. So it's like in this in-between sweet spot, and learning to exploit it pretty much removed for a classical error correction in CPU, in hardware. You still need it, like you have it on QR codes have embedded the error correction. So if some of it gets destroyed, it's still legible. CDs have error correction, DVDs. So that's why you can still use them if they get scratched. But like your microchip doesn't use any fault tolerance. It just uses the fact that silicon is extremely reliable.
Right.
But in quantum, even small changes can change anything, and you need to cool stuff down to prevent it.
Yeah.
And there is a threshold. It's called the threshold theorem. It was actually proven by my PhD advisor, Dorita Aronov, when she did her PhD with Mickey Benor. She proved it in her PhD.
What did she prove?
The threshold theorem. She proved that there is a positive temperature, that if you cool down your quantum computer below this threshold temperature, then it's possible to do fault-tolerant quantum computation.
Wow. Oh shit! Right. That's massive. Because obviously all the quantum computers now rely on this.
Well, there's a reason that Dorit is such a big name.
So Shai, just moving on, right? So these things, like the question perhaps I'm asking is positioned more towards Bitcoin. But the same thing could be applied to Kaspa, bringing back home, perhaps.
So this thing could be applied to anything that uses these digital signatures. It doesn't really care. So we haven't really talked about solutions. The most straightforward solution is to use what we call post-quantum signature schemes. But there are a lot of problems with post-quantum signature schemes. And even if there weren't the problems with the schemes themselves, then there is still the problem of how do you rally everyone to go to the new signatures? What do you do with people who can't or who didn't? There is a very, very intricate discussion here. And as I said, most of my contribution during my PhD is to this discussion. Essentially, we managed to create the first protocol that essentially, in a way, it's not completely accurate, but 90% accurate to say that our protocols allows you to have a fully functioning blockchain without using digital signatures at all. Now, you do need to use digital signatures, but you only have to post them to the blockchain in case someone tries to fraud you. As long as anyone is honest, you don't need to post any digital signatures to the blockchain. And there were attempts to do it before. The method is called the commit delay reveal. And the point is that you commit to a transaction and wait a long time and then reveal it. But previous solution had all sorts of problems that made them incomplete, and we managed to fill these gaps. I posted a while ago a lecture I gave in Presidio Bitcoin, at least gave online, where I talked in a lot of detail about this problem and about our solution. So if anyone is interested, you could easily find it on my Twitter.
So Shai, I was also reading about the Bitcoin community, right? They're actively discussing this threat to Bitcoin, right? And they're proposing things like BIP 340, which is Noor signature, right? So that's one of the proposals they have, laying the groundwork, but it would obviously take years and years of planning, and obviously would require, a lot of upgrade from the mining software wallet. You're talking about years, right? Like 5+ years, based on general estimates.
And Jameson Lopp also published a new BIP a few weeks ago. It doesn't even have a number yet. But here's a plan on doing this migration in a schedule that's supposed to start after the activation of BIP 360 and take a decade, I think. Because it's not enough to implement post-quantum signatures. You need to somehow phase out and eventually snip all of the pre-quantum stuff.
Right? All the nodes is the easy part, but the wallets upgrading is perhaps gonna take a long time.
Yeah, like moving all of the UTXOs. Now, the thing is, I don't know what Bitcoin proposed to implement, but generally speaking, post-quantum signatures are hard. They require much more space. They require much more involved hardware to compute, which is insignificant if you use your computer or your phone, but if you want a hardware wallet, then it complicates things a great deal. And they keep updating and upgrading. The process of designing them is not over. So I don't know if Bitcoin are planning on any sort of cryptographic agility, but if they don't, then they might find themselves having to fork again after maybe the signature they chose is compromised in some way. But I think the biggest problem Bitcoin have to face is that they have a trickle of a throughput anyway. So now you're gonna have to use signatures that make all transactions about 10 times larger. You're gonna be in a problem. And this is one example of where I think Kaspa is actually better positioned than Bitcoin, because Kaspa can accommodate a lot more throughput. So if people keep saying, what do you need 3,000 TPS for? Okay, maybe 3,000 TPS is enough. How about 300 post-quantum TPS? So this is something that I think, like, there could always be unexpected obstruction, but in essence, this is something I think a high throughput system like Kaspa can provide better than Bitcoin. I think, and I have all sorts of ideas for how Bitcoin can concede to the fact that it's not supposed to be a commerce backbone, but more like the world's decentralized Fort Knox, which is like the most secure shared resource in the world. And posting to it is supposed to be an expensive boutique service that is supposed to fund the security of this thing. And then you can use it to do all sorts of slow settlements using stuff like commit delay reveal, which is slow but requires next to nothing. It requires less space than current ECDSA signatures, and then let networks like Kaspa do all of the quick stuff and provide enough security, for when you look about a year, 2 years, 3 years. But if you want something that would be reliable in the sense that information 100 years old, verified today, has some reliability, then I think this is Bitcoin space, being like the world's decentralized safe. And if you take this narrative, then Bitcoin doesn't even need post-quantum signatures. It could implement this cheap and slow solutions that will make a Bitcoin transaction. Maybe it will take a week, but it will only require like 64 bytes, and you can do a lot of them. And you want to be quick when you pay for money, but it doesn't bother anyone if it's gonna take a week to move around like 5 crates of bars of gold. It should take a while.
I like this analogy, and I think perhaps just seeing what's happening in the Bitcoin community, it seems they are.
This is water, by the way. I keep making this mistake.
Come on, Shai, it's okay.
It's like 1 p.m. here,
So just, I guess, moving on with that same sort of thread, what happens? Let's say we are in this world, we are in 2035, and we have Satoshi's Nakamoto's wallet, right? We have all the solution, but this wallet that's holding actually 1.1 million Bitcoin, who knows how much it's going to be worth at that time, doesn't upgrade to post-quantum cryptography, right? Be it Lattice or whatever the solutions might be at that time, right? What would happen to that wallet that's holding, like, at the current market price, $133 billion of, value?
I think that Bitcoin are going to have to realize that some money is going to get lost. And you need to burn it, because if you burn it, then at least it doesn't find itself in the way of it's bad enough that I don't know, like 10% of the supply is gone. But now suddenly this 10% is not just gone, but you know that someone holds it and you don't know who they are, but they are probably very powerful, because if it's the first person to build or the first entity to build scalable quantum computers, then you know that this Satoshi stash wasn't divided among 10,000 cypherpunks to figure it out. It probably went to some country's government. Let's not name names.
Yeah. I see what you mean. Right.
Yeah. So there are ways to salvage a lot more money than people realize. But we came up with a way to salvage a lot of money, but we can't help any wallet that was created before 2014. And we put the cutoff in 2014 because the key to salvaging money, even money that is beyond exposed keys like P2PK, is the fact that the key, even though the adversary can recover the secret key, the key was derived from a seed. And because going the way from the seed to the private key has hashes along the way, and these hashes are still quantum secure, then we came up with a technique, with a protocol that allows people who knows the seed to use the fact that they know the seed to have an advantage over the quantum adversary. But if the quantum adversary knows that there is no seed, which is the case for the Satoshi stash because it's before hardware wallets were even invented, then you can't help. And this is beyond salvage. But one thing cool about this protocol is that it allows to save lost funds, in the sense that if you lost your secret key, then this protocol will still allow you to recover your funds.
Oh, I see. Right.
Because the entire point here is that anyone can try to spend, but when they spend, they have to put a deposit and wait for a long time, like a year. And they're saying, it's my money, I lost the key. Then they tell you, okay, put here a large deposit and wait for a year. And that's what you do only in this case, the lost key case, where there isn't any other way to verify it. And the point is that if someone else has the seed, they can post a proof and take your deposit. And since you don't know what keys were lost, and even worse than that, people are incentivized to fool you into thinking their keys are lost just so they could grab your deposit, then you can't really just go and try to brute force. You have to have really, really, really credible information to steal money this way.
So when you say it's going to be, they'll have to burn it. What does that mean?
It means that they're going to hardwire into the protocol. They're going to have to hardwire into the protocol that from a certain point, from a certain block, any transaction that spends UTXO that were created before some date are invalid. You just can't spend this money anymore.
So like the best scenario there is these wallets become active and we'll have to upgrade to this post-quantum world.
Once this information, the cutoff is known, then whoever has these keys always has the options to migrate them properly. If they choose not to, then they choose to lose their money. Those are the only two options. You have to say, at some point you have to say, okay, this has become too much of a concern. You have a year, either move the money or the money is gone. I don't think it's unfair. I don't think it's unfair to the owner of the money because they had their opportunity. And if it was, 5 Bitcoins, 10 Bitcoins, fine. But since it's like a decent chunk of the entire circulation, then it threatens to undermine the entire economy. So there are bigger things to take into consideration here than, the ideal that you never mess with wallets, even though they're 15 years old and they're hasn't moved since. There is a tension here, but I think this is the huge problem, though, that it's really hard to rally the Bitcoin community into doing anything. They've waged internal wars, like bloody, violent internal wars about OpConCat and about SegWit2. So getting them to burn money is going to be quite an endeavor. But I think they're going to have to do it at some point.
Well, they will have to decide, right, what's the right way forward, because this threat is real one way or another, if not now, 10 years, right?
10 years is the minimum. I think in practice we probably have a lot more time, but you'd rather be prepared, right? I think 10 years is a good target to set because it's a lot of time to prepare yourself, but it's still near enough to be safe. I don't think there is an actual threat that quantum computer will start wreaking havoc in the next 10 years. But I think if you wait more than 10 years, you're starting to accumulate more risk. So it's better have at least have like this plan set in motion by 2030.
Yeah. What about Kaspa itself? Like, what can Kaspa do to move to this post-quantum world?
Well, first of all, like the bare minimum is implementing some sort of post-quantum signatures. Now, I think, and it's very easy to say, like I'm just delegating work to other people, but I think there should be some sort of cryptographic agility. And we just mean that there is some robust and seamless way to switch between different primitives. So, for example, if now someone finds a vulnerability in a signature scheme, then make it as easy as possible for anyone to switch to a new signature scheme and think they lay the ground. And there is an entire other aspect I didn't even talk about called quantum mining, and how quantum miners affect the network. And here the game is completely different, because to be a meaningful quantum miner, it's not about how many qubits you have. It's about what is your clock speed, or how fast can you run. So quantum mining will definitely not be too advantageous. It's one of these situations where it's not like an adversarial thing, but the natural dynamics are bad. Like if you have large quantum miners, even if they are all profit maximizing and rational, and none of them is adversarial, you can see that at least in the few situations we understand, the strategies that we'll take will increase the orphan rate. Essentially because if you are like halfway through groverizing your way to a block, and then you hear of another block, then you don't, classically, you don't lose anything by saying, okay, I'm going to mine over this new block now. But quantumly, if you hear of a new block, you can say, okay, I'll measure my state. Maybe I'll find a block. I have some probability to find a block, and then I'll send this block instead of the block I've heard of. So it just increases orphan rates like this, naturally, without any adversaries.
I see. Of course. I mean, that's entirely new.
It's called aggressive mining. It's very subtle. And the thing is that the scales that you need for meaningful, significant quantum computations with quantum mining are much, much, much larger than what you need for breaking ECDSA. That's the good news. On the bad news front, apparently there is a quantum double spend attack. Essentially, if you take a quantum miner, say 1% of the Bitcoin hash rate, then they can double spend. 1% is enough. And the reason for that is very, very subtle. It's because of the difficulty adjustment. Essentially, what you do is you split to a sidechain, but you purposely make the blocks more difficult. And why are you doing this? Because for a normal miner, making a block more 10 times more difficult, 100 times more difficult means that he has to work 100 times harder. But Grover gives you this quadratic speedup. So if you make the blocks 100 times more difficult, you only need to work 10 times harder. So if you started with 1%, now you're 10% because you're only working 10 times harder, but you're making a chain that is 100 times heavier. But what saves us is this: if you do the math, because Bitcoin has this strict limitation that the difficulty only changes once every 2 weeks, and then you can only change it to be at most 4 times more difficult, then the computation says that a 1% adversary, which is huge, right? 1% of Bitcoin is insane, but a 1% adversary would require 300 years or 400 years to double spend, something like that. But now you ask the same question for Kaspa. And in Kaspa, first, there is no such limitation, but let's assume that there is one. The difficulty is recomputed every single block.
Right. So DA, right? Computed every single block.
So if Bitcoin changes once every 2 weeks, and Kaspa changes once every block, sorta, there are some limitations, but very roughly. And then you get that you can pull off this attack, how many ever there are seconds in a week, in 2 weeks, times 10 faster. Like 20 million times faster. I computed it. It's like the same attack would work on Kaspa in a few minutes, right?
Right.
So essentially, in practice, in theory, a 1% adversary can but and I talked about it with Ori, and he said that maybe at some point, just to cover our bases, we'll write a keep about limiting the difficulty change rate to disallow this attack. But even 1% from the Kaspa hash rate is exceedingly way above the clock speed we expect of quantum miners anytime in the next century. And you have to remember that I said that you have a quadratic speedup, but it goes the other way around. If the adversary is 10 times smaller, then they have to work 100 times harder. So we see that. I don't think it's a huge concern, but maybe it's something that's worth talking about. I mostly think about it because it's interesting. I don't think it's a salient threat to Kaspa in any way.
No, it's intellectual, right? At this stage, what we discussed.
Yeah, but it does say that having this very, very large, a lot of blocks, like this very high block rates, does create unexpected phenomena. So maybe there is a reason to understand how quantum mining affects Kaspa, because all of the inherent protections we have against quantum miners are essentially saying that they're going to be negligible, but maybe it is offset by having so many blocks makes much smaller attackers more significant. I don't think there is a huge cause for concern here. I think it's mostly interesting theoretically wise.
Yeah. No, awesome. Look, Shai, that was amazing to discuss this with you. But just wanted to give an opportunity here. You had some alpha for us. You wanted to mention some things.
Yeah.
So why don't we go into that and we wrap up after that, straight after that?
Yeah, sure. I'm really excited about this.
Yes, tell us. We are excited too to hear.
Yeah, I've been approached a few months ago, I think 3 or 4 months ago, by this company who is going into the post-quantum blockchain stuff, which, when I hear this kind of stuff, I'm immediately on my toes, because most of the time when you hear this combination of quantum and blockchain, it's nonsense. You see projects like Dynex, which do absolutely nothing, and it's disconcerting. But I went and I wanted to hear more, and I went and I read about them a little bit. They are called Tectonic, by the way. You can check it out at tectonic.xyz. And the thing that really, really captured my attention is when I heard about this, about their scientific lineup. Now, when I went into the website, I've seen that the chief of research, I think, head of research, is a guy called Omri Shmueli. And that almost immediately raised a very positive alarm, right? It's like, this guy is a bit of a legend. He just finished his postdoc, I think, which means that we were PhDs during about the same time. And I clearly remember that during my PhD, I kept seeing more and more and more papers by this guy, high-profile papers with high-profile cryptographers solving more and more problems specifically related to quantum protocols with classical communications and all this cool kind of stuff. And I thought that he was like a professor. And then someone tell me, no, he's just a lonely, lowly grad student like you and me. And but even during his PhD, I was extremely impressed with the quantity and quality of his work. And just he solved a very, very, very important problem called one-shot signatures. He published a paper about this with another legendary cryptographer called Mark Gendry, and they won the paper of the year in one of the largest conferences. I don't remember which. And it's a really, really interesting lineup in this sense. And if you go and look at the team, you see that each and every one of them is either a prolific academic or someone with tangible experience in the construction. And now they have like actual builders, Ethereum builders, and they want to build a post-quantum blockchain, proof of stake blockchain. But this is like just the start. They want to go into this direction of looking at quantum not as something that you want to just as a threat, but also as something useful. It's supposed to be a useful cryptography. Like people, a useful technology. People keep talking about quantum computers as threats. They forgot that these things were invented to provide some value and people want to use them. But Omri Shmueli is at the cutting edge of research of how you can reasonably actually use quantum capabilities. And one thing that people don't realize is that there are miracles, absolute miracles, miraculous properties and cryptography and security that is impossible classically, that you can achieve quantumly without a full-scale quantum computer. You need much, much more modest quantum capabilities. Like with modest quantum capabilities, you can't do any interesting algorithms because you can simulate classically everything very easily. But you can do amazing protocols. There are very, very simple states that the mere capability of me to create these states and send them over to you is enough for us to achieve classically impossible stuff. And the qubits has to be very simple. They only need to be simple. They don't have to have a lot of any entanglement or a lot of entanglement or very complicated states. Just the mere fact that I'm able to create a qubit in one of 4 states and send it over to you means that we can do stuff that's supposed to be impossible.
That's yeah.
It's crazy, and they are all about one of the directions is to go into creating this platform and to a platform that is useful for providing quantum services of all sorts. And this is interesting, this is amazing, and it is the people who are involved are leading the research. And as I say, it's not a niche research. It's not, I see a lot of projects that show their papers, and there are papers that are posted like on MDPI. People see MDPI, they see, oh, it's a scientific journal, it looks lucrative, but MDPI is a pay for publish. Anyone can publish there if they pay the money. It's not really a peer reviewed. And these guys, their papers and their works are on Post and Fox and eCrypt and QCrypt and all of the major conferences. They are highly recognized and acclaimed researchers, with very prolific, and all of this together is very exciting to me. I've been accompanying them and giving like a mixture of advisory and writing.
Yeah, I was going to ask Shai. Sorry, Shai. I was going to ask. So this is just clarifying Tectonic .xyz.
Tectonic, like in one word, like tectonic plates.
Tectonic.xyz. So that's a new project.
So it's very, very formative. If you go to the website, you will find almost nothing. A few statements, and you can see, like, if you just look at the website, it kind of looks fishy because it's a very new thing. But they are creating really, really amazing stuff, and it's still formative, but I think it's the most, if not the only interesting post-quantum project I've seen today. It's led on fundamentals that are cutting edge, but highly established, which is not something you see quite often. And I'm extremely excited about it. And,
awesome.
And I'm happy to be able to talk about it a little bit. And I've been accompanying them in terms of, finding the message, finding the way, and helping them with the stuff that I do. I don't want to be too explicit because I don't want to accidentally divulge stuff that I shouldn't, but I'll just end it by saying it's a very, very exciting project. And for me, for someone who studied quantum cryptography in the context of blockchains, this is like saying stuff that I've known for years, and I always thought about them as nice thought experiments. Seeing people that are actually stepping up to build them is amazing to me. It feels like the future. And these are extremely serious people. So I really recommend looking into it, even though it's very clearly in a very formative stage. It's because they are hyper-focused on the tech itself. And all the PR stuff will come in due time. But I think it's a very, very early introduction.
That's amazing, Shai. I am so happy for you that you are working on a project that you are excited to be part of, and I'm excited to check it out myself.